a big positive announcement is the KPFA votes have been counted and the results announced. We, OREB, supported the KPFA protectors slate, and we won big. Thank you to everybody who voted and everybody who helped make phone calls to hundreds of KPFA members. And the protectors slate won 8 out of the 12 seats. That included 2 staff members of KPFA, Sherry Gentleman and Chris Corey, and 6 at-large members, Don Goldmacher, Jake Varghese from OREB, Catherine Taktukin, Fred Dodsworth, Leslie Howard, and Brian Crowell. So we actually also have another member, Mark Van Landed, who's been on the board for a while. So looks like OREB has a strong presence there now. So the next thing, we're starting to go out a little bit and set up tables at farmers markets. And what we've been doing a little bit lately is having tables set up to support Pamela Price in her run. This is the year that we got to do it, or 2022 is actually the year, but we need people to come out and work for her. Okay, and we endorsed her like really early. I think it was like last January or February, and we decided to hold off our other endorsements until closer to the election. And so in January and February, we'll have a number of meetings where we'll have different progressive candidates coming and asking for us to endorse them. And if you're a member of OREB, then you will be able to actually vote also. Okay, so today we've got a really busy lineup. Time will be tight. There will be time to ask questions of everybody or make comments. So let's get started with it now. Our first speaker is Susanna Williams. She's a leader in the Contra Costa Democratic Club. She's a e-board member in the California Democratic Party. She's been elected to be a delegate for Bernie Sanders, and she's co-chair of Our Revolution East Bay. So we're thrilled to have her give a presentation. So
awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thanks for that great introduction. Thank you, everybody, for spending part of your Sunday afternoon with us and getting some information. And we love hearing from you as well. So I'm here just to, and Igor is following me, and Igor can fill in any gaps because he was probably far more involved in this entire process than I was. But as Carol was mentioning, I sat on the executive board for the California Democratic Party. And at the last regularly scheduled meeting, several of the delegates and executive board members attempted to make a motion to amend the agenda, specifically to add an item regarding the taking of fossil fuel money and law enforcement money as donations to the party. Chair Hicks ruled that out of order. Multiple people tried to make that. That was a direct violation of the California Democratic Party bylaws and Robert's Rules of Order. So Amar Shergill, who is the chair of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus, Igor Tregub, who's also caucus chair, and several of the other caucus chairs, along with a lot of delegates, put together the necessary paperwork to push for, and we got a special e-board meeting. So that e-board meeting happened a couple of weeks ago. The sole purpose of that executive board meeting was to have these motions be made and voted on. A lot of work was put into that ahead of time. This group went out to central committees, Dem clubs, other organizations, got endorsements, signing on. There was huge support for having this meeting. Originally, the meeting was supposed to be in person because, as you all have probably figured out, while Zoom meetings are awesome for certain things, it's really easy to shut down voices in a virtual meeting, whereas it's not as easy to do that in an in-person meeting. So we had an in-person meeting scheduled in Oakland, and we were forced to turn that into a virtual meeting, even though the California Democratic Party had in-person town halls scheduled for a weekish after this particular meeting. So we all registered, got logged on, and we unfortunately sat back and witnessed a very well organized, heavily choreographed end run around the sole purpose of that meeting. There were 2 motions that were to be heard. Conversations were had with Umar Shergol for the whole group about speakers were pre-chosen to speak pro and con to the motions that were being made. So on the progressive side, we were very upfront about what we wanted to happen. Behind the scenes, an end run was made. Speakers were cherry-picked. People who were called on were cherry-picked. No points of order were allowed. And there, Barbara Lee was actually the one who made the motion to set up yet another committee to discuss this. There has already been a committee that discussed the fossil fuel donation money and recommended against that the CDP not take it. So this was just once again kicking it, down the road. And with the environmental situation and with law enforcement, we have no time to wait. So all of us worked really hard on this. Basically, sat there and listened to this well choreographed effort. We did get our motions at the end of that. However, we just simply at that point did not have the votes to have those motions get passed. Probably one of the best things to happen out of that is there was a record taken, which is another thing that was brought up at the beginning of the meeting. We insisted on. There was a record taking of who voted how. Those votes have been now posted on the CADM website. And as soon as I can find the link, I'll post it in chat for you all. So you can literally go and see how people voted. Not a ton of surprises there. You'll find the progressives, pretty much voted how you would expect. But there was definitely some surprises there. Oh, Igor just put in chat that there wasn't a vote on our motion. Oh yeah, that's right. There was only the vote. Thank you, Igor. There was only the vote to add our 2 topics to be discussed in the committee. Thank you. Good point. Anyway, so personally, it was a very disheartening experience. Kind of heard that from a lot of people. I don't ever expect the party to welcome progressives with open arms. I expect them to fight us every step of the way. But I really thought that they would actually let these motions be made and let people vote on it. They were so concerned that we would actually have the support to push the party into no longer taking fossil fuel donations and no longer take law enforcement donations. And there were very specific criteria laid out for those law enforcement donations, what was included in that. The unions came out very much not in favor of that, but this was set up in a way that did not affect any union donations whatsoever. This was purely law enforcement associations, etc. There were exceptions written into it that would make it so that nothing would affect a regular, actual union negatively. So anyway, that's kind of what's going on at the party. There's an executive board meeting coming up next week. No clue what's going to happen or be on the agenda. An agenda item that was made by Glenn Glazier, a motion was left hanging at the end of the meeting. I don't know if that's going to get addressed. And that was to discuss how agendas should be handled for our meetings. Because right now we have zero, as executive board members, we have zero say in what goes on that agenda, whether it gets amended. We have absolutely no input. And that's been that way for a long time. Going to in-person meetings before COVID, you could even get a copy of the agenda. I mean, what was on the agenda at those meetings was usually a surprise. So that's another thing that really needs to be changed. So I just want to kind of give you the 2 cents, inform you. Igor can definitely fill in the gaps. He worked on this really hard and spent a lot of time on it. I'm personally really disheartened by this. I've been around for a long time. I've worked in the business world. I know how, how stuff works in the real world, but this was very unnecessary. I think they won a battle. They'll ultimately lose a war over this. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to, how are we doing questions, Carol? We're doing questions afterward? Oh, you're on mute. Carol, you're still on mute. Unmute.
Okay, we're gonna do questions after each person, but I need to quickly make an announcement. I'm not sure who Brody is, but we're getting a lot of feedback coming through, and I don't know if you're on the phone or what. If you could do something to fix that, that would be great. I don't know if you need to mute yourself or what. The name of the person.
Yeah, Brody, if you could just mute, that should probably take care of the problem.
I don't think it's her because her audio is not even connected.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Okay.
Okay, good question.
Okay.
Zoom glitches again. Okay, anyway, so that is my report from that little situation. I'm still here, still standing. Honestly, Our Revolution's my first love, and I get more accomplished working with Our Revolution than I ever have working with a party. But we have to keep working with the party. It's kind of what we have to deal with right now until we can, force an alternative. So without further ado, I am here also to introduce several of our speakers. And next up, we have Igor Tregub. Igor, you're still on, right?
I'm here.
There you are. I see you. Yes. Okay. So Igor is, as I mentioned, one of the champions of what we're trying to do. His progressive chops go way, way back. And he is currently also the, in addition to being an executive board member of the CDP, he is the chair of the Environmental Caucus, which is one of the most powerful caucuses within the party and arguably the most important caucus in the party, given that we're killing our poor planet. So without further ado, Igor, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you for your advocacy. Yes, this has been a very long 5 weeks and one hell of an organizing effort, calling almost 400 executive board members. Ultimately, I completely agree with you that the party leadership, David Campos excepting, did everything in their power to try to stop this vote from happening. But the fact that we did, the fact that we came as close as we came to having a vote on this issue, to me, is a win. And as Bernie always says, not me, us. This is our collective win. I was very grateful when I was looking into the spreadsheet of volunteers who was going to be assigned to calling various e-board members. How many of them came from Our Revolution and affiliated organizations? And to any of you who made calls, who talked to folks that you helped elect to the executive board in your assembly districts, anyone that did anything to help us move over the finish line, my heartfelt appreciation goes to you. We will continue to organize. So there are a few things that we can do right now to make sure that this work does not go in vain. Number one, during the month of November, this, what I'm going to call Committee 2.0, and the reason I'm calling it Committee 2.0 is because there was already a Committee 1.0 that unanimously in February 20th, 2020, recommended that the party cease accepting fossil fuel money from fossil fuel entities, where it sat on the chair's desk pretty much until 54 of us signed the petition, and the officers finally had to go on record and promise that until this committee 2.0 made its decision, no such money was going to be taken. Similarly, there was a committee that already made a recommendation, and it was also a unanimous recommendation to not accept contributions from fossil fuel entities. That was done after in the wake of the horrendous murder of George Floyd in August 2020. So this committee 2.0, I'm going to, once I'm done speaking, drop in the chat a link to where you can go to make recommendations. And I hope that all of us, I think I will need to double check to make sure it's anyone that can make recommendations, or if you have to be a party delegate to do so. But I think regardless of that, everyone should flood that page and say the motions that we had an opportunity to pass but didn't 3 weeks ago must be reaffirmed. And then the party also has now, in order to fill out that page, it's a required question. They're asking you to tell them where replacement money is going to come from. Well, for months now, we have continued to solicit replacement money from renewable energy companies. And there are other, whatever ideas you all have, it could be as simple as what, a really amazing fellow executive board member by the name of Henny Kelly, who incidentally also was Bernie Sanders' partner in college. She has held challah bake sales, and she has raised $27 at a time, all small dollar donations as replacement money. There are so many people that would actually give to the party if the party went on record that they will not accept dark money. And you can also put that as an answer to the question of where the party is going to get its replacement money. I also want to mention just this is part and parcel of the insidious power that the fossil fuel and law enforcement industries have over not just the party, but the state legislature and every piece of apparatus that's happening. And I mentioned the fight to save local and community solar before. This is coming to a head next month. The California Public Utilities Commission is about to issue a proposed decision, which if PG&E and Sempra, and Sempra is a Southern California-based fossil fuel company that also owns two investor-owned utilities down in SoCal, that incidentally contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars last year to the CDP. If PG&E and Sempra have their way, we are not going to have any more local or community solar for your home, for your neighbor's home, for multifamily affordable housing buildings, for schools, for small businesses, for local farms. And obviously, we need to stop that. So I'm putting a link in the chat right now. This petition, we're trying to get to 100,000 signatures by November 20th. Please send this out broadly to any and all lists that you are on. This is a super simple request, but basically we need to show the powers that be that while PG&E and Sempra are perceived by this, both the party apparatus and the state apparatus as too big to fail, the even more powerful group of people is all of us. It's the power of the people. So we need to flood this signature. We need to please make sure that everyone you talk to has seen it, and let them know what is at stake. Where this is truly utilities and fossil fuel companies doubling down on trying to make a renewable future so expensive that it's going to be impossible, and therefore we will even further overshoot our climate targets within the 5th largest economy in the world. There will be opportunities later that I'm happy to talk about. I will put my contact info in the chat. There are 2 upcoming California Public Utilities Commission meetings where we are working on a massive action to flood the phone lines and have just 50, 100, 200 people make calls in support of saving local and community solar and not letting investor-owned utilities have their way. And then finally, I want to invite you to a California Democratic Party Environmental Caucus meeting, which will happen 2 Thursdays from now, November 18th, 5 to 7 p.m. We will be doing it in concert with the party's Children's Caucus. The chair of the Children's Caucus, Ann Crosby, was also instrumental in helping us organize to try to get the party to do the right thing. And actually, over 40% of executive board members did do the right thing. So we're going to talk about where we go from here. There's also an opportunity right now to provide comments into the California Democratic Party platform to make sure that it continues to be progressive and becomes even more progressive, because that's the #1 way that we can say, well, now let's make sure that we don't talk out of both sides of our mouth, but actually put our money where our mouth is. And then I had a request to talk about things that are happening in 2022. It's actually a little bit early to figure out, like this is the time right now. If you have relationships with your local legislators, this is the time when they're going back to the drawing board and putting together various bills. So if you have ideas for bills, this is a great time to reach out to them. There are also opportunities to continue to organize around making sure that climate change, combating climate change is an important part of however weakened the version is of the infrastructure plan that is part of which is at the president's desk. There is one proposition that I have seen. We don't know who's behind it, but it seems to be a replay of Prop 3, which was a really horrible water bond. It's basically a payout for all these companies that are already trying to take advantage of our water crisis. It's a payout to big agriculture, and the losers here are all of us. So right now, organizations are working quickly to oppose this ballot measure before it even receives enough signatures to go to the ballot. So if you get pitched to sign something that sounds like a water bond, please ask who's behind it, and they will probably not tell you who's behind it because it's very mysterious that way, and there's a lot of dark money involved. I have not heard of other propositions right now, but what is going to impact a lot of this is redistricting. And the maps that are being proposed by the statewide independent commission, by and large, are really horrible. We have until November 15th to go onto the website. It's wedrawthelinesca.org. I will put that in the chat. If you do, please make sure, it would be best if you don't identify yourself as a member of our revolution or a member of the Democratic Party. Just identify yourself as a community member who cares deeply about keeping your local community of interest intact. And that's the only way that we are going to, for years to come, be able to have maps that allow candidates who actually represent our community's priorities and our own priorities be elected, and not just provide handouts to large corporations, which is what some of these maps currently propose, because the Republicans have found a really masterful way to not come across as Republicans, but are behind a lot of the really bad maps that have been drawn up. So sorry that I can't give you more on 2022, but there are things happening right now that that are going to be very consequential to what 2022 looks like. I do know that there are going to be several important bills that will be coming back. One of them will be around setbacks. The governor just proposed 3,200-foot setbacks for oil drilling, between oil drilling and residential. And I'm really glad that he finally issued that executive order. But that executive order does contain a lot of loopholes. So stay tuned for a Sierra Club petition that will be going live next week, and I will send it on to Carol and Susanna when it's live. And also, speaking of Sierra Club, if you are a member, there are elections happening for your local leadership right now. Please vote by November 30th, 11:59 p.m. And I have some recommendations if y'all want to hear them. I will post them in the chat. Thank you so much. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Igor. Yeah, definitely, post your suggestions for the Sierra Club, and thanks for the reminder in chat. Yeah, like that redistricting that's going on right now, definitely get involved, get engaged with your community. Igor's absolutely right. Do it as a community member. I've seen some of the maps for Contra Costa, and they're horrific. I have no idea how this is going to shake out, but I mean, some of these maps are just insane. So yeah, definitely check in on that. And I know there's still town halls going on. Thank you. WeDrawTheLinesCalifornia.org. Igor just posted the link in there. You can go in there and check out the current, where they're at on the current maps. So nothing's been finalized. This is ongoing, but definitely have to get engaged. And if there's a town hall in your area, try to log on and get involved with that. So thank you, Igor. I'm not seeing any questions. So we are going to move on to our next speaker. Alfred has been our revolution member.
Susanna, Alfred is not here yet.
Oh, he's not here yet. Oh, okay. Sorry.
So we're not going to move on to him. I expect him in about 10 minutes. Okay. So, what we usually do towards the end, and I think we'll just move it now, is we do announcements and introductions, and that we'll do that right now, because the last speaker has a long time, and if we started Michael now, the whole thing would be a little weird. Oh, Alfred's here.
Oh, Alfred's here. Oh, yay. Okay. And yeah, Johnny's not here yet either. Okay. All right, cool. For some reason, I had thought I had seen Alfred. Okay, good. Alfred is here. Okay. So, yeah, so Alfred's also an executive board member of the California Democratic Party. He sits on the board of and I'm going to screw this up, the California Democratic Party Asian Pacific Islander Caucus. He is a former president of East Bay Young Dems. And he's our resident policy expert on all things housing. Definitely our go-to. So without further ado, Alfred, you are on.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about redistricting, which is a once in every 10-year process that really determines which districts are progressive, where we can win. How much time do I have?
You got a little bit. Do you need any do you need screen sharing abilities or anything?
You have a good 20 minutes.
Okay, yes. And
Yeah,
yes,
we're
it'll be good.
running ahead of schedule.
Yeah, please let me share the screen because I have a few things I want to show everyone.
Okay.
You should be able to.
All right. So redistricting, what is it? Redistricting is something we do every 10 years after the census to make sure that each district, whether it's a congressional district or a local city council district or BART board or any other special agency, has equal population. But in addition to equal population, districts are also supposed to be drawn to make sure that different communities of interest, such as a certain ethnic group, for instance, are able to group their power together to elect somebody to represent them. So, as I said, every 10 years after the census, this year, because Trump fucked up the census, the redistricting process is running on a really compressed schedule. The state, congressional, and county districts have to be done by the end of the year in order for people to run using them in the 2022 primary, which will be in June of 2022. For the local elections, such as city council, those don't need to be ready until spring because that election is in November. So most of those have deadlines in March, April. So why is redistricting important and why should you pay attention and participate? We want to avoid gerrymandering. So there's a couple famous types of gerrymandering where you can take an equal population but draw yourself an advantage. One of them is called cracking, where you take a community and you dilute its votes into a bunch of different districts. And the other one, which is sort of related, is called packing, where you take a lot of people and you draw them onto one district. So it might be 100% Democrat, but then the Republicans have 60% Republican districts in the remaining districts, and therefore can win a majority of the seats, even if they don't have a majority. So these are the things that are often used by unscrupulous politicians to influence the balance of the districts. But it's not just an issue for Democrats versus Republicans. It's also an issue for progressives versus corporate moderates. Because just like Republicans will try to crack and pack Democrats, the same thing can happen with progressives. For example, if you're trying to make sure that tenants or immigrants have representation, you have to watch out for cracking and packing as well. For instance, one thing to really pay attention for is low turnout demographics, where you want to make sure they have what's called a supermajority district in order for them to elect somebody. So let's say we have homeowners and tenants, and we've got the homeowners in yellow, the tenants in blue. The gray ones are the ones that don't vote for one reason or another. Maybe they're not a citizen, maybe they're too busy. And homeowners, because they tend to be wealthier, they tend to have been around longer, they have a higher voter turnout. And so you can see on the top, if you draw districts that are mostly homeowner and mostly tenant, the homeowners will outvote the tenants, even in the district that has more tenants, simply because they have a higher voter turnout. And so therefore, if you want to make sure that a group with lower turnout still gets somebody that represents them, you want to draw them a supermajority district. So for instance, in Berkeley, students are a classic example of that. a lot of them vote in a different place, maybe back home where they just moved from. And so therefore the student voter turnout is much lower than the homeowner turnout. And before 2010, the students were split up among different districts, and therefore they were unable to elect one of their own. But after the 2010 census, the districts were redrawn to create a student supermajority district where about 90% of the population is students. And through that, they were able to get a district where a majority of the voters were also students. So it took a 90% student population district to get about a 60% student voter district. And that's the importance of the supermajority districts in this case. This kind of thing is also important for making sure that immigrants are represented. You might have a recent immigrant population where most of them aren't citizens yet, but they might be the majority of the population in an area, and drawing them a district helps make sure they have a representative. Same is true for low income as well as tenants as well. And this is mostly a thing at the local level. At the state assembly, congressional level, the districts tend to be a bit too large to really pull this off. But for city council districts, this is the #1 thing to be looking for, making sure that the rich homeowners don't steal all the seats that the rest of us should also have our share of. All right, so next, I'm going to show some examples of things you can use to analyze districts. Switch over to a different screen. So this is this tool called Dave's Redistricting.org. And what it is, it's an interactive map tool, and you can draw different districts on the map, and it will show all kinds of analysis. It will tell you what the population is. It will tell you whether it's a mostly Democrat or mostly Republican district, and so on. You also have a few other statistics you can do. So this is a useful tool. Again, it's called Dave's Redistricting, or DRA 2020. It's free to use. You can use it to analyze local districts as well as state level districts. So the state level process is the one that's more up and coming. So I'm going to show you where things are at right now for that. This is the latest that the Independent Redistricting Commission has put out. And let's go to the Bay Area. You all see this? Yeah.
Yep.
So the Bay Area, they try to keep things fairly similar after several rounds of comments. We're going to zoom in here to the East Bay District. You can see it looks pretty similar to the current AD 15. However, it's shrunk a little bit. As you can see, Pinole, Hercules are no longer in this East Bay District. And the reason for that is that places like Berkeley, Richmond have added more people faster than the suburbs. And so geographically, this district had to shrink a little bit to maintain equal population. San Francisco is kind of a weird split here going on, which they used to have an east-west split. Now it's more of a northeast, southwest split in San Francisco. And this is because that they are trying to draw an Asian district in the Western San Francisco district that covers places like the Excelsior, the Sunset, as well as the Bayview, where a lot of Asian immigrants have recently moved to. And that district is grouped in with Daly City. Oakland is mostly whole in one district for state assembly so far with Alameda and San Leandro, similar to the present day 8018. Let's skip San Mateo. So this is the problematic one. This is Assembly District 20, which is Hayward, the unincorporated communities, Union City, and Pleasanton and Livermore, which are not at all like the rest of the Hayward. And this is a problem because, as you know, Jennifer Esteen is challenging the corporate Democrat that currently holds this seat. And if the district includes places like Livermore and unincorporated East County, that's going to be a tough fight. And so what you can all do to make sure that the districts are more based on similar communities is you can send in comments using their community feedback form. And I'll send you the link in the chat for this later. And ask them to take Livermore and Pleasanton out of the Hayward district and group it in, for instance, with the Dublin district, because those are more similar suburban communities. And the phrase that the districting uses is called communities of interest. What is a communities of interest? A community of interest is basically, if you think about all the different categories of things that you're not supposed to discriminate against, such as race, religion, and so on, those things are also known as communities of interest. And so when you're making suggestions to the redistricting committee, what you want to do is you'll want to go to this form, you'll type in the name of the visualization. So for instance, this is called VAD Alameda 1107. And then you would type in your comments. You would say, the community in Hayward is very different than a community in Livermore, for instance. And then you would select the counties relevant, like Alameda County. Now, one thing to remember is that the districts have to be relatively equal in population. So if this district were to shed a couple of cities, it would have to pick up some other ones. So for instance, it could pick up a couple of parts of Fremont, or more likely, you want to pick up parts of San Leandro, which are next to Ashland, San Lorenzo. And then if that were to happen, then the Oakland district will also need to pick up perhaps the rest of Oakland that's currently in the East Bay district. And then the East Bay district could gain back Knoll, Hercules, and those other communities that are in Contra Costa County that are currently part of 8015, but not in this version. So think about it as everyone does a shuffle around that. And Senate districts, let me show you where we're looking at right there. As you can see, the Senate districts are fairly similar to what we have currently. You've got Senate District 9, which includes everything from Rodeo down to Oakland. And then one of the elections we're paying attention to is Senate District 10, which is the Hayward Fremont district. And again, we have a progressive running for this open seat, Aisha Wahab. And this is a fairly good district for her. So even if you see a district and you like what you see, you should also put in feedback saying, I like this. This keeps these ethnic communities together. This keeps working class people together in one district. And that way they will be less likely to change the map. Because the whole redistricting schedule, it's wrapping up right now. They're having 2 more meetings tomorrow and Tuesday, and then they're going to be drawing the draft maps the following week. And the whole process will wrap up by the end of December. And finally, let me just show you the congressional districts. Okay, so the congressional districts, they look fairly similar to what we currently have right now. You've got Berkeley, Oakland, San Leandro, and Alameda in the congressional district. And then Richmond is grouped in with Concord, Pittsburgh, and so on, and Vallejo and Benicia. So that's a pretty good grouping as well that could elect a fairly progressive congressperson. And further south, you've got this large district that goes all the way from Hayward to Livermore, which is kind of unavoidable given the large size that congressional districts have to be. There's a lot more shuffling down in LA area because, as you know, California's population has not grown as quickly as other states in the last 10 years, and so we lost the seat. And because LA has not grown as much as Bay Area, the seat that we lost in California was LA congressional seat. So yeah, I think that's a basic overview of the redistricting process. So get your feedback in. You really want to do this tonight because they're going to be meeting tomorrow to discuss and talk about districts, talk about the communities of interest. Do not mention partisanship. That's one of the things they cannot take into consideration for drawing districts. They cannot say, oh, we want to put the Democrats in one district, we want to put the Republicans in another district. But they can say things like, oh, we want to put the working class people in one district, we want to put the rich people in another district. That's okay, because those are communities of interest. So, questions?
I think Kabir had a question in the chat. Who's getting gutted? I think that was for the LA area.
Oh, I do not know. That's a lot of that is still very up in the air today.
So any more questions? I'm not seeing any hands up. Oh, I now see hands up. Igor, do you have a question? And Amy, you're up next.
Yeah, Alfred is right that LA is very much up in the air. But what I have heard is that Karen Bass's district might be the one on the chopping block. Could be, because these are still draft maps. As some of you know, Karen Bass is not running again. She has elected to run for LA mayor instead.
All right, I see a question from Amy.
Hi, so I apologize, I got on late, and if this is a repeat of something you already went over, then I can look into it again after this, that's fine. But the last maps I had seen were the ones that came out on the 2nd, and I heard that there were some new maps. I tried to look at them today and I could not figure out the links, like weren't right to get to it. But I did, well, Susanna's putting something in there. So I was just worried about, I was gonna ask about McNerney's district, and also like what was happening with Grayson's, because it looked like 14 kind of disappeared and it became like 2 other things. So could you just speak a little bit about what's happening with Contra Costa on the current map?
This is on Congress, right?
I'm sorry, Assembly District.
Assembly, yes. So the latest is the November 7th. They just came out today. And the link to that is in the chat. So let me switch over to that again. So you can see there's this Solano district that goes all the way from Pinot to Hercules up through Vallejo, Fairfield, Vacaville. And oh yeah, here it goes. It's pretty much off Solano County plus Vallejo, Benicia, Rodeo, Crockett. Is that the one you were talking about? I'm
sorry. So I'm a delegate for 8014, and we were part of like kind of more than, it was kind of a weird thing. It kind of went from Vallejo down through Contra Costa, like Martinez, Clyde, then out to East County, about to Pittsburgh. And
Okay.
so
Yeah,
it
so
looks
that
like
district has
now
changed.
they put-
It's pivoted upwards. And
so there's
then,
Vallejo there, but
Right.
what about for Martinez now? Martinez is going to be in an area that will actually go all the way down like the 680 corridor. Is that still the same?
yes. Yeah, Martinez is with the 680 corridor. And then
Okay.
East Contra Costa County, because they've grown so quickly in the last 10 years, they have their own district now,
Okay.
Concord, Antioch area. Chris Peoples, I see you have a question.
Yeah, two things. One, I've been working with Margaret Okazumi, who was a Sanders delegate and is an environmental activist. I did a lot of work with her 10 years ago in doing the redistricting, and she's very, very good at it. She's done a set of maps for all the congressional districts in the state. And I should find those and put the link in the state. But a week ago, because this goes so fast, we draw the lines census data was all screwed up. Has that now been corrected?
I believe it has. I remember Margaret talking about this as well, but it appears to have been fixed.
Yeah, okay. It was because it was very hard to get all the numbers that are appearing on the top of the maps to be correct, because their census data was garbled.
Yep.
And I think Matthew had a question. And I think that's our last question. Matthew, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I had a comment. I wanted to correct something Alfred said, which was about the student supermajority district. Berkeley City Council District 7 was always a student supermajority district, and it elected for year after year, like the most pro-student council member to ever be on the council, Chris Worthington. What happened in 2014 was they changed the district lines. They made it more student supermajority, a higher percentage, but they actually intensely engaged in cracking. They took out the most progressive parts of the students and they moved them to District 6, where their votes are like useless because it's just so conservative there with all homeowners. And they replaced those students with students in fraternities and sororities who they thought would be more conservative, and the council did that in the hope to get rid of council member Chris Worthington. They failed, thankfully. So that's just an important correction, and that was an example of cracking there. Cracking, but not so much packing.
All right. Yeah, thanks for the details.
Thank you, Matthew. So it looks like we don't have any more questions. Alfred, thank you. This was like super informative because this is really confusing. These maps have been making my head spin. And just like Amy, I went to the link and I couldn't figure it out. So this is like amazingly helpful. You did a really good job on making this a very succinct presentation and showing the actual maps.
I have a question for Alfred, actually.
Yes.
If it's not too.
Okay.
Alfred,
You have like 1 minute.
did you say that this you can use this for like local redistricting, not just state and federal, or did I mishear you?
So I was talking about the Dave's Redistricting website.
That's what I meant, the Dave's Redistricting. I'm sorry, I was talking about Dave's Redistricting. You said you can use that for like city council redistricting as well?
Yeah, you can draw anything in there.
You just don't, you
Gotcha,
don't want to
okay.
refer to it.
Right. Well, because one of the things that Dave's Redistricting does is it also lets you analyze things like partisan balance, which is not so much a concern with local council districts here in the East Bay. But in general, when you're making comments to the commissions about the redistricting, you never want to mention partisan because that's not something they're supposed to consider. Yeah, And I think at a later month, we can come back about some of the local redistricting. A lot of those are not done by independent commissions. They are done by the current elected body. For example, things like the park districts or the Parks Board,
Right.
and so on.
Messed up.
Yeah, that would be great to have you come back and talk about that.
Yeah.
That covers a lot of territory and it's all local.
Mhm.
So awesome. Okay. Thank you. And I want to make a correction. Igor corrected me in chat, but since this has been being recording, I completely misspoke about who made the motion at the special CDP executive board meeting. It was Betty Yee who actually made that motion. Oh, seriously, my brain's not here. So I just wanted to make that correction, just so nobody gets the wrong idea there. Thank you, Igor. Thank you, Alfred. Our next speaker, I thought I saw Janani on here, just making sure she is here.
Here.
You're here, yay, okay. Okay, so our next speaker was heavily endorsed by our Revolution candidate for Assembly District 18. She is an amazing individual. She's an attorney by trade. She is an East Bay native and a daughter and granddaughter of immigrants. And she is a force to be reckoned with. And she is definitely going to be one of the strong leaders for progressive values within the state and beyond. So without further ado, Janani, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Good to see so many warm and familiar faces again. For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Janani Ramachandran, pronoun she, hers. And today I'm going to spend just a couple minutes chatting about Oakland's redistricting process, tagging along to what Alfred said. So if you live in Oakland, if you have friends and community members in Oakland, please let them know a little bit about what I'm going to mention now, which the key takeaway is there are only 4 weeks left to really voice input in the redistricting process here. And some of the proposed maps drastically change Oakland's boundaries. One of those drastic changes is an all hills district. So basically taking pretty much every part of the hilly areas of Oakland from the border of Berkeley up to the border of pretty much of San Leandro. And thankfully, that has gotten overwhelmingly negative comments from everyone from the hills to the flatlands. But really quickly, I just want to talk about ways to specifically voice input. Firstly, this is the first time the city of Oakland has ever had an independent redistricting commission. And frankly, they're very nice people, well-intended, have no idea what they're doing because census data came late and our deadline to finalize maps and vote on them for the commission to vote on them is December 31st. People thought that was a loose deadline. Maybe we can ask for an extension. Unfortunately, it looks like you're going to require a charter amendment to change the deadline. So basically, that's probably not happening. I have sat in on all of the redistricting meetings so far. I've read most of the comments submitted, and it's clear that the commission has not done very intentional outreach to the diverse neighborhoods in Oakland. So long story short, there are two main ways to voice your input. Firstly, I'm going to put a link in the chat, a couple of links in the chat. The first one has the map proposals. Oh, oops, to everyone. Has the map proposals themselves. So as you can see, there's map A, B, C, and D. A common misconception that the redistricting commission voted to eliminate map A and C. It's back on the table. Everything's back on the table. They're creating new maps. So the lines that you see here in any of these maps might not and probably will not be the ultimate boundaries. There are, I think, 3, possibly 4, if they vote to extend more meetings left to voice public comment. Public comment can also be emailed ahead of time, and they are reading everything. They're reading every emailed comment out loud, and they are taking every single online survey comment into serious consideration, frankly, because they've really not heard from the majority of communities in Oakland. And I say that they acknowledge that they haven't done a good job reaching out to community members because initially, their consultants said that some of 2 out of 3 of these maps, maps B and D, took community input into consideration. We soon found out that that community input was like 30 people. So now that's why they are kind of they were really back to the drawing board and mapping these neighborhoods. For example, just to give you a quick overview of some of the changes, I live in District 4, and maps B, C, and D would divide my neighborhood. I live in the Lower Diamond area, and all but one map would divide that. Map D, as you can see, will divide neighborhoods of Rockridge, Diamond, Coliseum, West Oakland, the actual port. So that is increasingly being scrapped as well, because they didn't really take community input into consideration because they don't know where the actual communities are. So if you want to make public comment and can't attend the meetings, the easiest way is to email Richard Luna. I'm going to put his email in the chat to submit a brief comment. They will read it out loud and display it on the screen in every meeting, and highly consider it. The other most important way to submit comment is through this online form. Alfred already described what community of interest means, but really it's also a space, for example, so a lot of what we've seen on the responses to this form is generally, I oppose an all hills district, I oppose you dividing my community, kind of the broad things like that. And this survey form is a tool to be able to voice that input. If you're interested in writing a comment and don't really know what to start, there are several links on their website, kind of confused, email me. I have this like 2-page guide to submitting redistricting input. I am happy to email that to you. Again, this is all just for the city of Oakland. And yeah, just final note that these maps, even map A, which is the least amount of changes, do pretty dramatically change neighborhoods. So look up the maps that you might be interested in. Check out your neighborhood, tell your neighbors, friends, etc. All the actual maps are on that central homepage, and email me if you want some more input. Happy to answer questions.
Awesome, thank you, Janani. Yeah, it's obvious now we have to all get involved in this redistricting. These meetings have been ongoing. These maps are starting to get really crazy. So everybody take these links down, write those letters, show up to those meetings, hop on those Zooms, and voice your opinion, because like they said, this happens every 10 years. So it's super important. So does anybody have questions for Janani? I'm looking to see, we have hands raised. If anybody has a question, raise your hand. I'm not seeing anything in chat.
I see one.
And oh, okay, Joaquin, I see your hand. If you had a question, you're muted.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, would this be in your view about the hills designation would be that? Is that in contradiction to what I've heard Alfred propose, that is actually a more fair distribution of voting power?
Oh, sorry, I might have missed when Alfred was talking about Oakland.
Well, I think his view was that if you did an all hills designation, that might be more fair because of they tend to vote more and be more homeowners and have a voting block, whereas if you divvy it up the way it's been traditionally, it's usually outweighs the flatland votes.
Yeah, well, so I'll give my personal opinion on the Hills District, and also the input we've been seeing opposing this Hills District comes from all over Oakland. It includes people who live in the flatlands of D6 and 7. It includes people in the hills, for various reasons. But I think in theory, in an ideal world, putting wealthy people together to minimize their power is a great idea. I think in Oakland, that's going to only exacerbate inequality for two reasons. Firstly, we know the influence of money in politics. In Oakland in particular, the districts right now, including D5 and 7 that are the most majority flatlands, have the highest percent of funds that not only don't come from the district, but come from outside of Oakland entirely, primarily big corporations trying to buy seats, frankly. And we know this because the Public Ethics Commission, which I used to serve on, studied the contributions where they were coming from. Districts 5 and 7, which are right now the mostly majority flatland districts, see less than 5% of their city council and school board race funding come from within the district, and the lowest amount coming from Oakland altogether. So I think if our goal is to empower voices in the flatlands, increase voter participation and engagement and turnout, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we need to do. But redrawing the lines, in my opinion, is not going to lead to that. The second reason is in Oakland, the hills are not a monolith. They're really diverse. In District 6, for example, the District 6 Hills area are majority people of color. There are significantly wealthier area than the rest of District 6, but most of the communities that are there are longtime Oaklanders, have family, community, friends, churches, etc., in the flatland parts of their same district. So don't feel comfortable being lumped in with the very North Hills, kind of on the border of Oakland, which has a very different racial demographic. There are also significant numbers of people who live in the hills who are not wealthy. There are a lot of people who are tenants. There are a lot of folks on fixed incomes. There is a diversity of folks who live in the broad hills. There's certain neighborhoods, for example, like take Montclair. That is a generally wealthy neighborhood, more homogenous than kind of all hills together. But so the diversity issue is something that a lot of people are concerned about too, feeling lumped into a monolith. But that's my take on it. I am open to feedback. And if the only criticisms of the All Hills District I heard was from all folks who lived in the hills, I would be skeptical. But we're hearing this from all over. We are hearing it from the flatlands of Oakland that they don't want to not have their slice of the hills, because people right now feel that every single council member has to be accountable in some way or another to the flatlands. Everyone has to listen to their portion of the residents that are there and can't let them feel left out. And I think this criticism for me is Oakland specific. I think theoretically in general, again, putting together areas that are the highest concentration of wealth and political power might theoretically be a good thing, but these are my comments for Oakland in particular.
Thank you. Joaquin, did I answer your question?
Yes, I would like to hear Alfred, comment on that at some point, but maybe not right now.
Sure.
Okay.
I-
Alfred, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would say John and you put it very well in that Oakland, as many of you know, is a special place. And in the case of the Oakland Hills, there is definitely a part of the hills that's mostly white and another part of the hills that's mostly Black and Latino. And obviously you don't want to lump them together.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we've got time for one more question. We went from running ahead of time to running behind time now. So Matthew, did you have a question for Janani?
I have a quick question which will affect my comment, Zanani. Under the map or maps that make an All Hills district, would Nikki Bass be put into that All Hills district?
No, so right now, the All Hills District, they're calling District D, which is pretty much going to be District 4. So right now, that's the role that Sheng Tao is in, but she's running for mayor, so it's going to be an open seat. That's another dynamic specific important thing about Oakland. Right now, there's a voting block of 4 solid progressive votes on our council out of 8, sometimes 5, depending on what. Council right now wants to make sure that there is at least 5 progressive votes. District 4, which has a lot of the hills, a significant part of the hills, but also some flatlands, has the potential to go either way. We had Dick Spies, who was a Republican, and we had Jean Kwan, who's relatively more progressive. And it makes a difference as far as that majority vote goes. And if you make it an all Hills district, it's potentially going to be more conservative and lose, because this is an open seat. So this year that's going to matter significantly. That could be the lost vote number 4, or vote number 5, based on the way that the other elections go. So right now, the way District 4 is structured, it's not at all like going to be a concrete conservative seat. It could really go either way. And in historic trends have shown that it has gone to everyone from progressives to conservatives.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this back over to Carol.
Okay, you guys, thank you for paying attention. This was tough stuff, and it's stuff we need to be informed about. Okay, so our next guest is an author, Michael Levitin. He's just gotten his second book published. It's called Generation Occupy, Awakening American Democracy. Michael was part of the original Occupy movement. He lived in New York 10 or so years ago when this was happening. And he's getting a lot of attention on this book. The New York Times has reviewed it. There was an article in Atlantic Magazine. He was recently on KPFA's Project Censored show. And I'll let him tell you the rest. Okay, welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Carol. Hi, everyone. Appreciate it, and really interesting getting to listen in to the really in-depth discussion. You guys do this for real on a regular basis and really get down and dirty with local politics, and it's great because that's if you're not doing it, who is, right? One correction to Carol's message there. It may appear as though it's getting attention, but I must say that the Occupy theme, coming 10 years after the movement was launched in September of 2011, many of us feel it did not get very much recognition in the media, as you're all aware of for the many reasons why something like Occupy would not get such attention. And frankly, this book sort of has fallen into that realm as well. So I've, and by word of mouth and people spreading the word and reading it or saying that it's worth reading, really appreciate it. It's at all your local bookstores here in the East Bay, and you can order it. And this is what the book looks like. And I thought I would just start out with the opening page of the book, Generation Occupy, to set the stage. And I'd love to hear comments from people. I know that many of you, Bernie, the entire Bernie movement in America, part of the reason I wrote this was because that movement, the birth of the new progressive political, the realignment and the transformation of the Democratic Party that happened after Bernie and really after Occupy. It began with Elizabeth Warren. So much came out of Occupy. That was one of the great causes, along with the activism in general, the climate movement, the economic changes with Fight for 15 and teacher strikes. So much that I found resonating during the past decade in the aftermath of Occupy, which really provoked me to need to tell this story. I was, as Carol said, one of the founding editors of the occupied Wall Street Journal, which was the newspaper of the movement. I didn't intend to come to New York or find a movement in full swing. I was supposed to get on a plane to Europe. The next day, I had a life over there. I'd been a foreign correspondent for mainstream outlets and a journalist for many years, which I still am, and now I teach at Diablo Valley College, teach journalism. But this movement, it captured me the way it captured, I'm sure, so many of you who tuned in when you heard that argument of inequality and corporate greed being sort of uttered for the first time in modern memory, really since, for decades, no one had sort of spoken up and used that language. And I was compelled to stay. I stayed, I joined. I was really at Zuccotti Park, and it was a while ago, but it's still in me. And I'm just lucky and fortunate to get this story out, which was important. So enough of preamble. I just will read one page, essentially 4 paragraphs, which set the stage for why I wrote this and sort of what Generation Occupy, why I called it that, in terms of where we are today and young people seeing themselves in the legacy of what we started, of the conversation Occupy initiated. Just a few paragraphs, bear with me, and then conversation. So the first chapter is called Occupy Generation. A decade after Occupy Wall Street ignited a discussion about wealth inequality, corporate greed, and the corrupting influence of money in politics, people still ask, what happened to Occupy? The movement that sprang to life in Lower Manhattan on September 17, 2011, the 224th anniversary of the signing of the US Constitution, sparked occupations in 1,000 towns and cities that seemed for several months to rewire America's political DNA. Polls showed 2/3 of the country backed the ideas and principles of the movement. And for a brief autumn, Occupy captured the global stage as its message resonated around the world. Then, like a storm, it was over. Collapsed both from its own lack of structure and from the state violence that suppressed it, Occupy vanished almost as quickly as it had arrived. One thing most people remember is that Occupy introduced the vocabulary of the 99% and the 1%, putting the crisis of inequality on the map. But that's about it. The movement created no electoral organization, achieved no legislative success, and made no real impact on American political life, or so the storyline went. To date, no one has provided an accurate answer to the question, what happened to Occupy? I would contend we're no longer the country we were before Occupy Wall Street revived the labor movement, remade the Democratic Party, and reinvented activism, birthing a new culture of protest that put the fight for economic and social justice at the forefront of a generation. Far from a passing phenomenon, Occupy inaugurated an era of political change in which the demands of the majority continue to grow louder and more focused. It began with the kids. The kids came out and they didn't go home. They targeted Wall Street, the source of our dysfunctional democracy, and issued a singular demand that was all of the demands: justice, fairness, equality. Their slogan, "We are the 99%, inspired hundreds of thousands to move away from their screens and into the streets and squares, where the vision of Occupy replaced the unfulfilled promise of Obama's hope and change. They had no leaders. There was no plan. This was not a protest. It was a rebellion, a revolt whose time had come. The seeds they planted took root overnight and quickly spread and multiplied, germinating in the country's consciousness. No one thought young people would remain camped out in parks forever, nor did anyone expect the movement to reshape the political and cultural arenas in the ways that it did. I didn't come to New York looking for a revolution. I came to catch a flight leaving JFK for Berlin, where I had a wife waiting to divorce me. I believe in the adage that when one door closes, another one opens. It may not be the one you expect, but the trick is to walk through it anyway. Perhaps I had been waiting for Occupy. We had all, to some degree, been waiting for it. And when it finally appeared, I felt I had no choice. It was right there in front of us, staring our generation in the eyes, daring us to act as no moment ever had, to put our convictions and our bodies on the line. We weren't used to doing such things, our generation. You could call us the Obama generation. The iPhone generation works too. We were the anti-globalization and the millennial generation, the unaffordable rent and college debt generation. We were also, of course, the September 11th, Iraq War, financial crisis, and Great Recession generation. We were the Occupy generation, Generation Occupy. So that's how the book begins, and it's not a short one, 330 pages. I went pretty deep with it in terms of trying to tackle the economic fallout, the political, my longest chapter, I must say, is the political revolution, as I call it. And maybe that's the one to actually focus on in terms of our conversation today, because I think what I brought to light in terms of Occupy's connection to our politics today was in large part for the mainstream audience, just simply making the connections of Occupy's language and vocabulary and its radical new approach to address capitalism itself and call capitalism the system, the problem. And that translated into Elizabeth Warren running the next year, taking that Senate seat. And she began to so quickly move the party and its whole frame of understanding in terms of regulating the banks, getting homeowners, trying to get bailout homeowners, taxing the rich. That moved into so many of these progressive races that went to Bill de Blasio with his Tale of Two Cities and mayors across the country. And then, of course, as everyone here is well aware, Bernie seized it. He'd been speaking this language for decades, but finally he was no longer shouting into the Vermont wilderness. He had a language and a generation and a nation ready on the right and the left, ready to finally hear and understand his critique of the billionaire class and corporate greed. And he kind of used, obviously, Occupy. It laid the ground, it paved the ground for Americans to be ready to hear that message, which they frankly, had laughed about, and he'd been marginalized as a Dennis Kucinich or any left politician for decades. But now it came to the fore. And what we saw with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, taking that mantle and then leading the kind of new progressive generation in politics, it's a very clear established line that you could follow, and the people I reported on and discussed in the book. It's not just my thinking about it. I really talked to a lot of people, dozens of people, over 50 interviews that go into this, activists and politicians and analysts and economists, but over and over, filmmakers, everybody sort of really concurs that Occupy was foundational for the Bernie message to light fire and to find that ready population that was ready to embrace the message of inequality, the 99%, the billionaires. But one thing, and I'd love to open this up for discussion, the real story that I kind of break in terms of breaking news to people, because none of this is necessarily new, but the inside story of how Occupy Wall Street founders of the movement, real inside people, some of the really tech savvy people. Charles Lenchner is the character I follow specifically, and every chapter uses sort of a person to help narrate the story, whether I'm talking about climate or the labor movement or activism or tech. Charles Lenchner, along with this small team of Occupy Wall Street veterans, started, first they wanted a group that was run Liz run. They kind of wanted a group, they thought Elizabeth Warren was going to be the presidential candidate to kind of combat Hillary and come in from the progressive side in 2015 to announce as a primary. When she bailed out of that, and everybody thought, in the progressive community, in the Occupy community especially, 60,000 people on an email list, they put out a message saying, who do we support? Who do we go? Elizabeth Warren's out. Everybody came back with a pretty universal, appeal, support Bernie. And they migrated this kind of Elizabeth Warren centric, hammering on the banks, keeping on that economic message, economic populist, 99%. And they migrated and they created people for Bernie. And I don't know how well it's known within the Bernie movement and the Bernie crats and the whole everything that's come since, how much it's known that People for Bernie, which was the launch pad to create all of the groups, Idaho for Bernie, Georgia for Bernie, Muslims for Bernie, Latinos for Bernie, the hundreds of kind of constituencies. They knew, these Occupy Wall Street veterans knew how a social media driven mass viral movement worked, because they had just come out of it. During Occupy, they had done it for real. And when Bernie, they knew, it's like the way Lenchner described it to me, it was tinderbox, it was like kindling, ready to light a fire. And they were like the forestry people who knew exactly how it was to work. And Bernie didn't have young people ready with a social media and with an online sort of presence. He didn't even build his website. It wasn't complete on the day when he announced his launch in April then of 2015. There was no place for people to go. This group, People for Bernie, which was separate from Bernie, and his people never really contacted, they never responded when the People for Bernie, Occupy people reached out to say, hey, we've got all these tools. We have great ideas for how you can ignite a real massive, not just a fringe sort of protest candidacy, but really do it. We've got these tools. They didn't get any response from Bernie's camp. They were sort of marginalized and, you know, treated as activists operating on the fringe. But what we saw and what the story that he tells is how People for Bernie, as I'm sure many of you maybe encountered the Bernie movement through that group, it provided this launch pad, this platform that then they gave away the keys. They gave everybody, it was a new form of decentralized organizing, much like a social movement, where they said, okay, great, you got ideas up in Wichita, you know, like Bernie, Wichita for Bernie or Spokane for Bernie. You got ideas about how you want to run your local campaign? Here you go. Here's your Facebook page. Here are the keys to the car. Now go drive it. And they decentralized it and gave away to everyone, but they provided this jumpstart with millions of followers. And it's a story that hasn't really been told in terms of connecting it to Occupy. So for this crowd with you guys, I thought that was a useful, you know, it was one of the most exciting parts I found in reporting this story on Occupy was the direct connections from Occupy to the People for Bernie, which helped spur his campaign. And of course, he then masterfully sort of did what a politician knows how to do. And he actually turned the language and the ideals into more than what Occupy did, which was a lot of talk and hopes, but no pragmatic game plan, no blueprint, no here's what we're going to do for you. So so that's that sort of an evolution, and love to talk and open it up. So thank you again for having me and the chance to speak about it. Should I just call it, if you all raise your hand, that'd be totally fine, like Larry right here, I mean, or Carol.
All right, I'll go ahead.
Nobody, go ahead and raise, Larry, you raising your hand? Okay, let's just start with you and we'll see how it goes. I think
Okay.
Gordon will be next after you. I'll kind of monitor it. And then,
Sounds good, Carol.
Thanks, and thanks for the presentation. As somebody who's trying to get demonstrations going through Indivisible mostly for attempting to salvage democracy with some kind of protections for voting in elections, what lessons from Occupy would you pull for both strategies and tactics for getting more people out, waking more people up, both in terms of reaching out to people and also changing what we do to attract more people?
Indivisible sure seemed, I was part of Berkeley, Indivisible Berkeley for sure. I was in Berkeley at the time. I'm in El Cerrito now. I thought they did amazing work. They were the jumps, they were the energy to get the Trump resistance really rolling. But now as we see, I think you're totally right. Participation, like where's the movement? We got a climate core, we got a 3 trillion, that's been etched down to 1.75, and all the chaos and mess in Washington. And yet it's almost like the protesters have sort of gone home and people are in a pandemic and we're cash strapped and either jobless or looking for, it's not ideal situation, but I agree. I think people need to come up with a new sort of organizing call to action right now, because it's clearly a moment in which the people need to have a voice. Otherwise, folks in Washington, if something of that power of a mass city by city, the whole idea of the Occupy phenomenon was that it decentralized protesting. I think looking back at protest movements, they had been so much more hierarchical. The Iraq War protests, which were so powerful and hopeful, but they didn't succeed, and in terms of stopping the war. And they also showed how the older model of kind of labor unions and folks in high offices and rooms in the East Coast who would design protests and say, all right, now everyone, let's replicate this kind of in this structured way. Occupy broke that old model of organizing and just decentralized and allowed city by city to do like Indivisible. And like all the relate it to Black Lives Matter and like Standing Rock as well, and the climate strikes and the March for Our Lives, the gun violence, so many movements, the Women's March, so many were this decentralized form where it didn't require some kind of big national organizing structure. It just meant, hey, every city, every group, go out and do your thing and ally and strengthen each other from a distance. But I would hope that some new message on the political front, whether Indivisible or someone, could take that model and build on it and do what's needed now, because we need people in the streets. It's as though, I don't know, it's as though this is a lull for many reasons, but it should be a really active moment with the climate on our doorstep and with the hundreds of thousands marching in Glasgow. That could be a global call to action. Yeah. Sudia or
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it was-
What I was going to say, speaking about the Bernie campaign, something that he did that we found really useful was he really laid out what a Green New Deal looked like and what were all the components that were in the Green New Deal. And we were able to do a bunch of community house parties, interactive house parties about the Green New Deal, where we would have it all printed out, and each few people would take a portion of what was in the Green New Deal and kind of read it together and then report back to everyone else, so that by the end of a session, everyone was familiar with all the components of the Green New Deal. And then we were asked to do it in our local high school in Oakland in 6 different government classes. So that was really exciting. And we chose at the end of each of the sessions to use a short film from the Sunrise Movement to sort of show the young high school students, where it is that they could plug in immediately. So it was a really good experience. And we're still using the materials that we created for doing that. And we'll be doing it again. We have Environmental Institute. We will be doing it with the participants in the Institute. And then we work internationally and we take the pieces of the environmental plans that need to be worldwide in many ways. And I think what's going on in Glasgow and all the protests around what's happening, and Greta, saying, and they want this by 2030 and this by 2030 and blah, 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 blah. I think a lot of people are tuning in more to that sense of blah, 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 and it's not happening and there's not enough pushing. So, I mean, in the last week, we were at 2 climate protests, one in Oakland and one in Berkeley, and, both very dynamic and well attended. But I think that this needs to just keep going on because we are in bad shape momentarily.
Thank you, Sudia. And there was a big, I devote a whole chapter to the climate, to the evolution, because Occupy people were so instrumental in pushing it. The chapter is called From Occupy to the Green New to Sunrise, because it really, the people who developed the modern climate movement, the radicalization of putting your bodies out there, so much of the anti-fossil fuel, the resistance up in the Northwest that we saw, the divestment movement of students, Standing Rock, like I said, there were so many movements that had those strong echoes, the anti-fracking movement. It really does make sense that we would see a radicalization. And the end of that chapter is sort of like, if we don't see from our leaders real action in this existential moment, we're going to escalate and turn the climate movement into something that is like resembling maybe what we saw in the 30s with mass strikes and shutdown of the apparatus, and somehow to mobilize in a way that we haven't seen in this country in 80 years. That was the message of the young post-Occupy climate, mobilizers. But yeah, I agree. That's the issue, right? We don't do that. We don't do it. I just want to say to people, if you're interested, I put a couple links in the chat box. One is to where you can find the book and buy it. It's online easily. And one is just to the Atlantic article where I kind of shrunk the case of the book into about 2,000 words in an essay from September that talked about it. But yeah, Carol, were you?
Yeah, I'm going to be calling on people just because I have the list here. So people, you can either raise your hand or you can put a question in chat and you will get called on. So the next person is Gordon, and then Kabir, and then Jake. So go for it in that order. Gordon, you're first.
Okay, two questions I've heard. People saying, run, Bernie, run again. Do you think that's an idea? And the other is the keystone of this arch of non-responsive government is big money ruling both parties. And that movement has pretty much died off. Any thoughts about putting some fire back into that movement?
You mean the whole, the idea that everybody on the right and left was pissed off and making it known about big money in politics, and now we're not discussing that anymore?
Not at all.
Yeah, it's incredible, because one of the biggest, most popular moments of Occupy was the move your money. I mean, there was the move your money to out of the big banks to smaller banks, and it was get money out of politics was like a huge move to amend, had a big launch out of Occupy with popularity, and public banking movement also used it as a real setting off.
I mean, it's coming back a lot because of Manchin and cinema, but
Right.
not enough, and not in the straight media.
But I think that Bernie showed on that score, the $27, that cliche, 27, but look at how the progressive movement and now the right as well, they're going for small dollar, all the Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff, that's very much funded by, her own constituents giving 15, 20, 30 bucks here and there. It's not like it's a property of the left, but I think that is already now firmly, Bernie showed, Occupy raised the issue, but Bernie showed how it's done. AOC, progressives, the new everybody, small dollar donations. So that maybe is like a grassroots way of tackling big money in politics. But I think I agree with you, the talk about it on a national level, we've got so many crises. The idea of creating public elections and addressing the corporate, duopoly of corporate funded politics is like, it's now no longer on the top 10 list of things. I don't know how they resuscitate that. And as for Bernie, I think that he's created the generation and the frame, and he's powerful where he is. Me personally, at his stage, I just don't see him going after it again. I think he's got enough acolytes and people who have honed the vision and the language. I don't know. I wouldn't see it, but who am I to say?
A big problem with the movement is the baby boomers are missing in action. You've got a gap between AOC and Bernie Sanders, and if there's nobody filling it, and that's basically a generation that's missing in action.
Yeah. And that's a good note there, actually, on this note, Larry chiming in that you're right, the HR1 for the People Act was supposed to address big money in politics, and that's absolutely right. And it's probably not going to pass anyway. And if it does, it'll probably strip that, the Manchin cinema. They've really showed what's been fascinating these last couple of weeks, Manchin cinema, and how they're derailing the entire legislative agenda, is that it's as though preoccupied times have come back. And it's almost, it seemed as though we couldn't unlearn what we learned through Occupy. The whole country woke up to corporate politics and how unattentive to the democratic needs of a country our politicians have become. And yet Manchin and cinema show so clearly that they're still able to hijack and control the process. Two individuals funded by pharma and oil, and it's so I think focusing on them, the way protesters are going out, I'm surprised more people have not made their lives intolerable and shown to everybody, put them every day in the public spotlight, forcing them to answer questions. I'm surprised protesters, frankly, and a movement hasn't simply sprung up around that.
They are doing
It's happening.
Yeah, but it's small. Now it's happening. It's a little late. They could have started about 4 months ago. It would have been nice. But was Kabir? Yeah.
Kabir's next.
Yeah. Hey, I want to thank you a lot for this work. I've had this conversation probably hundreds of times in my life, because I was at UC Davis when the pepper spraying happened. That was my radicalization moment. And then a few years later, I helped start the UC Davis chapter for Bernie. And then I was one of the original people of Our Revolution East Bay, and have been involved in Bay Area progressive politics for a while now. And I yeah, I really want to thank you for synthesizing all of this and putting this out in the media. And I want to recommend you got to get on the podcast tour circuit and go out there and do long form interviews and kind of explain this, because I feel like this conversation is missing somewhere in the left of like connecting this whole last decade and really showing, like, I love that you called that like from Occupy to Sunrise, because like being involved in Sunrise was so motivating. Like those kids are the ones keeping me going. Like I was there the day when they Feinstein yelled at them upstairs. Like the continuation of these movements and talking about like decentralization, like all this synthesizing, I really appreciate the work you've done, because this is really awesome. Because this is like, I've had this conversation with other people and in my head for the last decade, but seeing it in a book that I can like put on my holiday list and get it, and like you just post this Atlantic article on the internet and talk to people about it is really cool, because it means a lot. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My one small question was it intentional with the price dollar amount? Was it $27 intentionally?
Ah, funny, nice one. No one said that,
No.
not at all. And
Well,
now that book sales are so low, and the regret comes in that they didn't just launch it as a paperback at $19, because what activists out there, or progressives in general, who wants to spend that? And I
I was
lament.
just asking because the Bernie 27 number.
I know, good call. And no, it wasn't. This is like, that's a standard, but that's a funny one. But yes, younger generation, boy, thanks for bringing that, Kabir. I'd love to talk further. That's
Yeah,
good.
I added you on Facebook just now. We had a bunch of mutual friends. It'd be great to talk sometime. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
Very nice. Great.
Okay, Jake is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw this out there that we at Our Revolution are actually doing the political revolution, and we've been doing it for a while, for the last 5 years. Just no one knows about it except for the people on this call. So last year in East Bay, we did 25 out of 34 endorsed candidates won. Across the nation, we have 67% win rate for last cycle. We've been doing this from 2016 or 2017. So to the person from Indivisible that's wondering what to do, well, bring them over here, because we're about to start our endorsements committee and do this for the next primary, which is starting in June 2022, and the ballot deadline's in March. So we're also going to be trying to get all of our endorsements finalized. Then we can start helping them campaign and winning as many seats as possible across the East Bay. So that's what we're actually doing here. We're doing the political revolution. So if anybody wants to help us, please come. This is where you should be. And yeah, that was my question. Sorry.
What is the question? That was the comment. That's a good, I hope that it is, that our revolution and that you guys organizing is able to move the needle here on the East Bay front. That would be, and on the whole Bay Area.
Okay, Michael Chang.
I have a question. When in your presentation, you seem to have hinted that if we leave things in the hands of the politician, things will get messed up. Of course, we all know what politicians are, including Bernie. They have to go out there and get things done. Whether they have the ability to govern, I use the word govern very loosely, or not, is not relevant, it seems to me. What do you think about this? How do we get capable people to govern rather than people who sound kind of exciting?
Boring, nice, good, boring, old style politicians that aren't out for themselves. The problem with this right now, look, I've been brewing on this subject now for a decade, since I slept out in the rain my first night at Zuccotti, and everything from there, it veered my life in a whole other direction, and my journalism and my view of a lot of this. But things have so, in the course of thinking of Occupy and what it meant, the Trump years and everything that accelerated the madness that we're now in, it almost feels like those Obama years and Occupy are so distant now in terms of where we've come. We've come to the point of insurrection. We've come to the point where our democracy is really hanging by a thread in a way that it just wasn't threatened like that when we were protesting and sleeping in camps and politicians. And it just seems as though it's getting kind of harder. I think that the left has mobilized the whole voter movement, the progressive movement, the AOC. I mean, she's just a stand-in for the young generation of people who were galvanized by Trump mainly to come out and engage in the political process. I don't see any other way than doing it at the local city councils, supervisors, state houses, all the way up to your representatives. The Republicans did that masterfully for, I don't know, 30 years since the Reagan era or so, and took over state houses across the country. They got the idea that you got to get local people elected, not just to Congress, but in your local assemblies. And Democrats, Democrats, in the absence of another party to combat Republicans, progressive, anti-corporate young people aligned with Democrats need to just run for more office. And I think that the idealists quickly get disillusioned, as I'm sure the AOCs of the world really are, seeing how it works and how frustrating and how close we seem with this bill and with Biden and the whole thing. We seemed so close, and yet it's just really frustrating. I don't know how you get regular do-good actual political people in office without the infighting. I think the culture stuff, the culture war and the identity politics is just derailing so much right now. And it's going to continue to derail it if the left wants to hammer on the banks like it started to 10 years ago, and hammer on the economic inequality and the injustice and corporate greed and money in politics. Then don't get derailed with the dozen other issues that are culture and that are red meat for Americans, who then can turn off to those issues that really matter to 99%. But I think that unless they sort of rearrange their rhetoric and start just going for the real bread and potatoes economic issues, I don't know. It's a rough game.
Instead of Mr. Potato Head or critical race theory or things like that.
All that.
I wanted to just mention something. I'm sure most of you get lots of emails from the Democratic Party asking for money. Since to vote for Bernie, we all had to be registered as Democrats. And I never erased it because I always like to see, what are you doing and what are you saying? But whenever they ask for money, I have a set answer. I mean, I'm not sure if it's a great or perfect answer, but I'll suggest it. I always say, we work with our revolution, local and national, and we endorse candidates who commit to Medicare for all, who commit to a Green New Deal, who commit to $15 minimum, and who commit to creating a culture of peace, which means removing almost 800 US military bases from around the world, and not engaging in any alliances about nuclear submarines. And then I say, wake up. And then I get these answers saying, you're very woke. Will you be on our advisory committee for something? And I'm always kind of shocked, really? So I don't know, if people start doing that more, maybe it'll let them know, that we are doing something and that we reject their way or something.
Right. It looks like Carol lined up Chris Peoples and Joaquin. Just to have last comments before you guys.
If people want to say anything, please raise your hand or put it in the chat that you want to speak. Don't just go into it, because we're trying to keep this so.
Sorry.
Okay, Chris, you're next. Unmute yourself. You're muted.
Chris.
You're still muted, Chris.
I did not have my hand up.
Oh, I thought you did. I thought you might have been scratching your head. I thought you had your hand up. Okay. We'll move on to Joaquin.
Hi, I put my thing in the chat. It was sort of like, I don't know if you got it, but it's like, how do you have any thoughts about how to unite the left and the, what do you call it, Popular Front, or, because there's so many groups like Indivisible and Working Families Party, Our Revolution,
350.
Absolutely.
Et cetera. How do you get them to sort of join up in a coalition to, push this agenda further?
I don't know if folks here know the name Kevin Zeese, the organizer from Washington, D.C. He was big on Occupy D.C. He's a long time. He died last year ago, about right as I was finishing, in September of last year, as I was just finishing the manuscript, and I had the good fortune to talk with him. He died suddenly. It was not expected at all. Great activist and organizer, a lawyer, one of the early decriminalization of marijuana lawyers. But he was this theorized protest and led workshops in schools with his wife, Margaret Flowers, who still does it. And this idea of a movement of movements has been like the holy grail of the left, right? This idea that at some point, the movement of movements, we've got a million movements, but how about the movement, the one that brings in these so many disparate forces, that people sort of talked and clung on to this idea for a long time, was his take on it, but that we're no longer necessarily looking for that anymore because of, as you say, our revolution and Indivisible, the variety and the climate movement and the racial justice movement and student debt movement, and you name it, all the constituencies. I agree. It would be so amazing to see everybody ally and be brought into a tent. And yet many activists I talked to and others sort of almost saw the decentralized nature of our time due to internet, due to our isolation from one another, but we're connected digitally. But kind of saw it as inevitable that we're not any longer looking at this idea of maybe one big movement. Occupy attempted to kind of, in its language, the 99%, it sort of tried to funnel everyone in, right? Of course, it failed to address racial inequalities and other things. It sort of had its own blinders. And those were corrected in a way with Black Lives Matter and other movements. So maybe it's more this evolution that we're seeing from Occupy to Black Lives Matter, to these different younger movements, climate now. Hopefully they are building towards something, like you say, one overwhelming force that is not simply 1,000 smallish nonprofit activist groups, but really one solid force. That would be the only thing, frankly, that would get people's attention, is if everybody came out. But boy, to organize the left, have you ever tried that? That might be why it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I think we should study up on the history in the U.S. of the United, or the whole world, of the United Front and the Popular Front, a couple of different ideas of how to unite people, and keep at it.
Right, I agree. And someone with a language, and young people need to figure out, what that, like I say, dropping some of this, the culture and identity politics, really dropping some of that to speak to the majority, and bringing economic issues to the fore, I think, which is what Bernie did expertly. I mean, he doesn't mess around. He doesn't fiddle with the small stuff. He goes right for the jugular. And that's why people nearly dethroned Hillary and sent him up there as a Democratic nominee, almost, because he did that. And I think we need to take that, who all,
Any more
thank you,
questions?
Joaquin.
Come on, you guys. We got time for one more. Okay, Sudi, it's yours.
I'm just saying that, I mean, with all the emails I get, a lot of times it'll say, this is endorsed by, and it'll list 25 of the different organizations that you just mentioned. So I think there is a coming together of a lot of organizations. And I think on common issues, especially climate right now. We had trick-or-treaters the other night, Halloween, and I made the kids sit down. I said, do you know what climate is, what climate change is? And they gave an answer. And then I had them listen to the climate song and to join in singing it. So, and we've done a bunch of workshops about how to nurture young people to be environmental activists. So, I think in different ways there's a lot going on, but I think you're right. It has to come together in some strong way to be powerful, to make, really important needed changes.
And I would just say that I feel, to end on an optimistic note, I do feel like people, in the way that I had felt, and maybe Kabir and others, I guess you're a whole decade probably younger than me because you were at Davis at that time. But in the way that I said in my introduction, just that we had been waiting for it, I do feel like now the country is so waiting. And the great optimistic part, and the part I guess that can give us hope, is that you never know what the spark will be. We didn't know that the Tunisian man, the vegetable vendor, would light himself on fire and ignite the Arab Spring over a basic case of corruption of his local, police and the courts. That ignited the Arab world, which set off the year of the revolutions and the Spanish squares, and it came to Occupy. And then the wave that set off from Occupy with Turkey, Occupy Gezi, and Brazil, the movement against inequality around the World Cup. And then over to Hong Kong, like the democracy movement in Hong Kong, very shaped. And I think these things are so percolating. And in America, we're at such a desperate point that I do think that this moment of a spark, you don't know what it will be, but I'm glad that those of us who are in this community ready to go when it happens are on the seat of our chairs, hopefully not waiting there for too long, but I do feel like it's coming. I think it's coming soon, and the climate is going to push it to that edge. Young people, they see where it's at, and that there's no more time, and it will happen. I hope they do it in a way that brings us all in. I'm optimistic in that sense. I think people we're not gonna go down silently. If the ship is, if this is where we're going, there's going to be a lot of disruption between now and then. I think this decade, and that was the last thing that Kevin Zeese left me with, was that movements don't reveal their power and their impact right when they happen. The civil rights movement took years. It didn't just happen in a year or two, as the labor movement that led to sort of the demands on FDR to create the New Deal. Things are maybe a generation out that it takes to see how much the impact and the movement actually spurs, and that the 20s, this is the decade when the impacts of this conversation that we started a decade ago, when we're really going to see the fruition. If we see it, it's going to be rough. We got a right-wing populist mob out there that's standing sort of in the way, but it's this is the time. I think we'll see it. I hope we're ready to confront it.
We better see it, or we're finished. Michael, thank you so much for coming. And again, where can people pick up this book?
I guess I could throw it once again on the screen. Let me put the link. If there's a million chats on there, so I'll put it right at the bottom to everyone. It is at any bookstore. You can order it. I mean, it's not on any shelf. It's certainly at Barnes and Noble, and here in Berkeley at Pegasus and other places around. But right there online, you can order through Amazon or it's called Bookshop. And I'm sorry about the price tag. Maybe you can find a cheaper version. It's just that's what it was. They thought coming off of everything, the election, that it was going to be a hot seller, but it hasn't been yet.
Maybe. Let's give it a little time.
With some voice, word of mouth. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Thank you, engaging. I really.
Maybe all the things, the links that are in the chat can be sent out to our Revolution list, because it's hard to get everything down, and all the things to look up and all the links that we need to know.
What you can do, if you want to chat, you can go ahead and just copy it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Gonna stay up for a while?
Okay, Gordon, I see a clapping over your shoulder. Did you want to say something?
Okay, I was just muted. It's outstanding presentation, a lot of good stuff. One problem I'm seeing is now that the people who are in have the letter D following their name, there's been a relaxation of vigilance, and maybe we should be still be vigilant even with people that have the D after their name.
No doubt. Agreed. It's and not a solution, right? But it's what we've got at the moment. But certainly, I'm all there with you.
Okay, thanks again, Michael. It was really good having you here.
All right.
Okay, so our next and final part of the program tonight is we usually allow the last few minutes for anybody to make an announcement up to 1 minute long about anything. And also anybody that's new here or hasn't been here in a long time that just wants to come on and say who they are. So we all get to know each other. Go for it. Who wants to go first? And
I'll just do one real quick.
Yeah.
We just had our latest Our Revolution East Bay Town Hall. It's on YouTube and Facebook. Go check it out if you haven't watched it. If you have watched it, please share it so that we can get the word out and share all the other town halls too across your social media, wherever you are, retweet them, everything. Yeah.
Okay, would anybody like to make another announcement? Would anybody like to introduce themselves? I know I see a couple people here that have been here a couple times. They're welcome to, again, just say hi or let us know what you're doing. Nobody? Oh, okay, Larry B. I see your hand up, Larry. And
Hey, yeah,
then Marisol.
Thanks. Just to quickly say, yes, I work with Indivisible East Bay as well as Indivisible San Francisco. Glad to be here. Great to see you guys. And just to re-up, we are running Friday actions at Senator Feinstein's office at 1 Post Street, 5 to 6 p.m. every Friday. There was a link earlier in the chat. Hope we can see some of you out there.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Marisol? We can't hear you.
You're breaking up, Marisol.
She's muted.
Oh, okay, unmute yourself, Marisol.
Still muted.
She's not muted. She has a bad connection.
Yeah, maybe you should hang up, Marisol, and come right back in. And
She already did.
Okay.
She already did.
Okay.
Maybe she should post it in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, post it
Someone
in the chat. And meanwhile, Matthew, you had something to say?
One sec. Sorry, I was just posting in the chat that Marisol had posted in the chat, in case you can't hear us, just like we can't hear her. Yeah, so as co-chairs were saying at the beginning of the meeting.
We can barely hear
you know,
you, Matthew. Speak into something.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, so as the co-chairs were saying at the beginning of the meeting, you can and should pay your dues. So if you haven't paid dues yet, or if you haven't paid them in over a year, I just realized as I was prepping this announcement, I don't think I've paid my dues in over a year. You should go in the link I just posted in the chat, which is ourrevolutioneastbay.org/donate and pay your dues so that you're a full dues paying member with the ability to vote and help us finance all the work that we're doing, because it takes money, not just people power, to be able to finance this. So please pay or renew your dues. And just do it at the link in the chat, which once again, if you're on the phone, is ourrevolutioneastbay.org/donate, or just go to our website and click the donate button, or go to the donate page called Donate or Pay Dues.
Okay, great. Yeah, just a little add on to that. People used to pay like whenever, and we're going to try to get it so people pay in December for the following year. And if you do want to vote in anything, you have to be a paid member, and there's a participation requirement also that offhand, I believe it is, you have to have been to at least 3 meetings or come out and tabled with us or done something with us in the past year. And I'm not clear what it is right now, but part of it has to be in the past couple of months. And this is done to prevent somebody from just coming in and voting a way that maybe isn't how we expect things to go. Anyway, so please join everybody if you're not members. Okay, anybody else? Marisol, can you try again?
Yeah, I think we lost her.
Oh, it looks like she's on here.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
No. Yes, I hear you.
No.
I hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, great, great. Yeah, I've been getting kicked. I'm not sure what's happening. Just wanted to say thank you. And I think this was a great meeting. As the author mentioned, it really kind of brought us back, you know, took us kind of on a memory lane trip of how, you know, really where we've come from, how, you know, how far we've come truly.
Uh-oh. We lost you again, Marie.
Yeah, it looks like
I
she
think
dropped
if
off
he,
again.
I think if he wants to give an announcement, he's going to need to join by the phone, instead of through the internet.
Could I make a suggestion that everybody sign up for the email sharing? And that our group has a email group. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That our group has an email sharing group for everyone that's a paid up member to Google OREB_members@googlegroups.com, and that'll get you a lot more you know, sharing about what's going on.
Great. Thank you, Joaquin. Okay, guys, we did it. It was a great meeting. I learned a lot. That redistricting was really something. I don't know how Alfred studies that stuff, but it was great. Okay, so thank you for coming, and we will be greeted now by Sudia, and we'll see y'all next time, hopefully.